Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, gamer boys and girls, welcome back to the pod. It is so good to be back. A lot has happened in real life and I just got a year older again. But here we are, so let's kick off the summer by talking about the June 2022 bundle.
Fuck yeah, man, this is the shit. This puzzle adventure, or maybe not even that, rather a puzzle walking sim, is one I've never before heard of, and what a shame it would have been to miss it. Core gameplay is simple as a bat. Each level is a wide open playground littered with clues all over the place, and maybe 2 to 3 main puzzles to be solved. And when I say littered, I mean it. You'll be bombarded with all the pieces of the jigsaw. Call of the Sea even goes the distance to note everything for you, so you don't even have to remember. Rather, your job is to figure out how all of the moving parts come together, how to decipher the information you received. As far as I'm considered, this is the best way to present puzzles. Don't make the player run hoops because they missed that one little interactive pixel that hides the key. Rather, give them a brain teaser that's solvable with a bit of effort, and let them enjoy that sweet aha moment and all the endorphin it comes with. Pair this with the pretty visuals, the great ambient sounds in the background, great voiceovers, and an intriguing Lovecraftian storyline that starts pulling you in within the first 5 minutes, and you've got a delicious recipe. Admittedly, the title is on the short end with its roughly 6 hours of playtime, and the only source of replayability seemingly coming from the option to go back in to find the hidden items in each of the levels, but who cares if you've had a blast for those 6 hours. If you bought the bundle for any other title, don't leave this one to get a virtual dust in your Steam library, otherwise do yourself a favor and pick it up separately for the absolutely fuck all it costs.
In the 22nd century Warsaw, people can no longer leave the town, because nature has taken over, and venturing outside the walls would mean facing mortal dangers. Thus, to escape the daily routine, citizens take refuge in virtualia, virtual worlds in which to experience situations of all kinds that can be reached by putting on a helmet. This is a very advanced software which, however, has not managed to eliminate the atavistic scourge of cheaters. To stem this phenomenon, Gamedec came into play. These are investigators who try to unmask the less correct players and save those who are in danger. Some experiences lived in the virtual world can also have repercussions in the real one, with dire consequences, hence the player has to solve these problems. Set in a dystopian future, Gamedec is a narrative role-playing game. I could say that is almost a clone of Disco Elysium, the acclaimed RPG of 2019, as investigations are conducted through dialogues. Likewise, there are no fighting mechanics, and the skill tree branches into different professions. Character creation is limited to the choice of gender and physical appearance, then we have to determine the social background. There are no classes. Indeed, the term profession that I've used, and which is used to indicate skills, is a bit misleading. It would be more correct to talk about personality traits that unlock certain options during conversations. Deciding to be an internet celebrity, for example, allows you to get into the good graces of some characters and thus to obtain some otherwise inaccessible information. The downside is that you won't be able to get in tune with the drug dealers, for example, because the Survivor's Pass has been rejected, which allows you to have links with the underworld. From the game structure point of view, Gamedec presents itself with the classic isometric view. The camera is fixed and it is not even possible to act on the zoom level. A limitation that does not weigh too much in relation to the fact that the levels are small and the sensitive points positioned in an easy to reach places. The action is basic. If you eliminate the interactions with the NPCs and with other objects, there is nothing else to do. What little there is, however, works really well. The characters are very well done, although sometimes falling into some inevitable cliché, and the level of writing is above average in both quality and quantity. The graphics, entrusted the care of Unreal Engine 4, are excellent of workmanship. The setting and the atmospheres respect the stylistic features of sci-fi literature, starting from Blade Runner, passing through Deus Ex, up to The Matrix. Some locations are particularly successful, such as that of the detective's apartment, which offers an unprecedented view of the contemporary Warsaw. Others are more canonical, such as the nightclub and the rainy slums. I would say Gamedec is a modern version of the old text-based RPGs. Embellished with pleasant graphics, the title of Funshot Studios offer an interesting story and a considerable amount of text, perhaps a bit too much. That can make it difficult for those who doesn't like to read. But for those who like the genre and the concept of the game, we'll definitely have some fun with it.
As much as I'd love to say nice things about Finding Nemo 3, Cocaine Nightmares, there's really not much I don't hate about it. This physics platformer adventure game starts off with an unknown bakerman splicing bread with some probably hallucinogenic substance and then handing it out to a customer for free. The product then ends up being consumed by our protagonist fish in a pet shop. All but one of them are purchased the same day, and once they come to, they all set out to find one another. Starting out with Budget Nemo, we experience the core concept of the game, find your way from start to finish by swimming around in different bodies of water, or on land by piloting your fishbowl or masonry jar or other similar items capable of holding water. This leads on to issues 1 and 2, namely the horrifically unenjoyable controls and the find your own path concept that, for me at least, led to more frustration than fun. As a prime example, Exhibit A, I literally spent 20 minutes attempting to figure out how to aim down that hole, as if being forced to watch a recap of every single sexual experience I ever had, just to then spot the path I was supposed to take was not even remotely this way. Needless to say, the combination of these two guaranteed I cried myself to sleep that very night. I mean, if anything, I guess you can't argue that the visuals are pleasant, even if not my cup of tea, and I don't hold anything against the puffer, he's a chill dude, and the only one of the four I don't feel a deep-seated hatred for, but as far as I'm concerned, if I'd ever have to go back to play another single minute of I Am Fish, I'd rather just roll over and die.
Phoenix Point marked in 2019 the return of Julian Gollop, creator of the original XCOM, with a game that started from the same formula, but with some added interesting innovations. In the not too distant future, global warming and the melting of the polar ice caps led to the emergence of the terrible Pandora virus, hidden for eons in the underground of the planet. In a short time, the virus contaminates the waters and transforms most people into violent mutants who respond to a mysterious collective consciousness, whose sole purpose seems to be total destruction. To respond to the emergency, the Phoenix Point was created, a military protocol that gathers the best soldiers and the most advanced technologies in order to face the advance of the so-called Pandorians. In the meantime, however, the world changes, and among the survivors there are three great factions with which we will have to relate: the fanatical disciples of Anu, the utopians in Darien, and the militarists of New Jericho. Soon we are faced with the Geoscape, a device that monitors the Pandora virus activity and detects any point of interest on the global map. On board an XCOM-style aircraft, we will have to reach these places to reveal their nature, then decide whether to land and deploy our soldiers to face a possible mission. The tasks can revolve around the simple elimination of the mutants present in the scenario, the reaching of a certain area, defense, or collection of resources. At the same time, it is possible to assign personnels to the various departments and headquarters, let it be manufacturing or research, that are carried out while we are exploring the environments. The game of course is a turn-based strategy, but with some interesting variations on the theme. On one hand, the possibility of aiming manually during an attack, so as to hit specific parts of the Pandorian's body, or perhaps eliminate a parasite that has taken the control of one of our companions. On the other hand, a management of willpower, that weakens if the situation turns to the worse, making our units performing worse when they are in a very difficult situation. This type of approach requires starting from the intermediate difficulty level, careful, timely and patient planning in relation to each phase of the mission. Given that the enemies inflict considerable damage, although they are driven by an often confused artificial intelligence, and the death of soldiers is in most cases permanent, which can leave us with an empty roster right away and severely undermine our chances to move forward. Phoenix Point is a turn-based strategy of great depth, which in this version can count on the additional DLCs that further increase the contents and therefore the duration of the experience. The game is fairly hard, but for me shines as much as any XCOM entry. The
3D action platformer Pumpkin Jack rolls in for a short but fun flirt. While most of the game you'll spend hippity-hopping around platforms with your double jump, or whacking around enemies with either your melee weapon of choice unlocked by progressing the game, or your single ranged attack in the form of your trusty companion crow flying at enemies, the repetitiveness of this is regularly shaken up by the small puzzle sections, auto-scroller sections, and the end-of-level boss fights. Individual levels run around 30 minutes each, and the full playthrough seems to clock out between 4 and 6 hours, dependent on whether or not you're willing to go back in search for the collectibles. 20 crow heads per level that act as currency to unlock different skins, and a single gramophone as well, that pretty much just unlocks a meaningless but fun little dance scene. Simple but pretty visuals with the vivid color palette, and a surprisingly catchy soundtrack mixing both original scores and regularly returning remixes of classical pieces into spooky Halloween themed tracks, Pumpkin Jack is one of the few titles where I didn't just mute the audio after an hour. If I wanted to complain about anything presentation-wise, it's the sameness of the levels one after another. A visually distinct snowy map or some sunshine would have been welcome, but let's be real, that's not really much of a complaint. Maybe a little bit more valid of a complaint would be to point out how jumping feels just a tad bit overtuned, feels as if Jack just has a bit too much velocity, but you can get used to that as well after a while. Pumpkin Jack is an absolutely casual action platformer that doesn't take itself way too seriously. It aims to entertain and certainly delivers on that. If you're looking to vent some steam after a rough day at work, why not load up a bite-sized 30-minute level and just enjoy the wackiness? PS, kind of confused though about why this wasn't kept for the October bundle.
Siege Survival Gloria Victis is a management game that shifts the spotlight on those protagonists that conflicts often leave behind. Precisely, ordinary people. An idea already touched upon by the beautiful This War of Mine, in which the player was put in a situation where the right choices do not really exist in the end. After the enemy forces stormed the city by raiding and killing anyone in their path, the remaining defenders retreated beyond the ramparts of the castle, and from there will have to resist until the reinforcements arrive, if they ever arrive. Characterized by the isometric view and the point-and-click controls typical of a strategic game, the player is faced with the efforts of the civilians, without whom the remains of the army would not have lasted, because war is not fought on a single front, especially in the case of a siege. This does not mean that the garrison or what remains of it is to be relegated to a corner of our mind. On the contrary, it is precisely those soldiers who prevent our heads from ending up on a pike, which is why we must allow them to fight at their best and in the right numbers. In addition, of course, to also take care of ourselves and our characters. Siege Survival Gloria Victis is divided into two main segments, both very important for survival: day and night. I will talk about the latter later. Daytime is the time of tasks and the strengthening of the defenses. Every morning we will be provided with a brief summary of the situation through icons in the lower center of the screen, after which we will have to dedicate ourselves to the construction of the structures that can support the primary needs, but at the same time support the nocturnal phases. We are not talking only about hunger and thirst, we also need to count the needs for medicines, bandages, weapons and armor, materials to strengthen the walls, everything and more. In Siege Survival, we will never have enough time to do everything, especially considering that the enemy launches attacks at a very close range, and we must always be as prepared as possible. Sadly, the resources are simply lacking, and our characters are usually too tired to be able to work effectively, so we must balance the needs of our people, the needs of the garrison, and the need for new buildings to sustain us in the long run. Each resource is closely linked to the presence and synergy of different structures, just as upgrades of the latter would not be possible without having first built certain buildings. Priorities must be planned well in advance, and from there maximizing efforts to make them concrete. So to have everything we need, we have to go out during the night. Firstly, we choose the starting point and the silent looting of the few remaining resources begins. It is important to check the map and the subdivision of the zones in order to match them with priorities. Because, for example, if we have an urgent need for food, we will certainly not waste time in an area where it will be difficult to find food. The same goes for any other resource we need. Everything must be calculated with great precision, and wasting time will backfire on us. Unless the guards find us and kill us first, because of course they will be looking for us. Then there will come the fateful moments when the enemies will launch their attacks. As already mentioned, you have no control over the combat itself, but you have to work before and during the siege, so that the garrison is able to effectively repel the enemies. We will feed them, quench their thirst, and equip them with the best possible equipment, while we take care of collecting rubble if the enemies use catapults, extinguishing any fire started by fiery arrows, and so on. All in all, Siege Survival is a severe, dark, punitive experience, but it's a good game, though it's not an experience for everyone.
A dogfight simulator nested in the Star Wars universe, Squadrons promises two things: blood-pumping multiplayer action and a thrilling story. Reality check? There's a barely existent player base online, and the story is mind-numbingly basic, with annoying characters, at the very least as far as the first 2 hours go. Now that I've spoiled everything up front, a quick walkthrough of what you can actually expect. Squadrons starts off with a quick 2-map tutorial explaining the basics of controls, and as far as tutorials go, it's pretty solid. You're then given the choice to either keep following the single-player story mode that takes place following Darth Sidious's death, taking turns in getting to experience it from the POV of the good guys and the bad guys. I'll leave it up to viewer discretion to decide which is which, or you can hop straight into online multiplayer. As mentioned, the story starts out dull, but the gameplay experience more or less carries it on its back. I'm fairly certain the roughly 10 hours it offers would somewhat competently serve as a quick fixer-upper for anyone craving Star Wars content, just don't let your expectations rise too high. On the other hand, the multiplayer scene, while not as dead as others we came across in previous bundles, it still took 10 minutes to get into a single game, just to enjoy the pleasures of some Russian basement dweller blasting Pornhub into voice chat. Not really my preferred choice of input for a fun gaming session. Needless to say, but visuals are top notch, paired with the sound work, they really lend themselves to deliver a AAA level TIE Fighters vs X-Wings dogfight, and I'm fairly certain Star Wars themed music would sell a $60 Mahjong game as well, no complaints there either. All in all, I was pretty close to regulating Squadrons to the 1 point category, purely on the back of the player base, but presentation and the fact that some will likely enjoy it for just the single player experience alone does end up keeping it above that level.
SUPERHOT Mind Control Delete is a very streamlined SUPERHOT. Basically, we are faced with a long collection of missions with the core mechanics of SUPERHOT. For those who haven't played SUPERHOT, here's the deal. This game is a first-person shooter in which the movement of the enemies and their bullets is linked to ours. When it is stopped, time passes very slowly and then flows at a normal speed when we are performing movements like attacks, collection of items, jumping, etc. The gameplay consists of micro-sequences lasting a few minutes, sometimes a few seconds, in which you must survive the aggression of a certain number of enemies, eliminating the required number of them before heading to the next stage. The construction of the missions in Mind Control Delete is however very different from that of SUPERHOT, despite the apparent similarities. Where the original title built the shootings as if they were puzzles, then asking the player to find a way to solve them, here the action is cleaner, so the player certainly has more space, but at the same time fewer interesting situations are created, because the direction deliberately chooses to put itself in a more secluded position. The devs have made greater use of the use of randomly generated content, in particular the generation of enemies and the position of some weapons, as well as the addition of some upgrades that can be unlocked by overcoming the various levels, which once activated greatly altered the gameplay, opening it up to new strategies. In this way, they were able to offer more content, but more doesn't mean quality, sadly. For me, what ruined the experience a bit was the difficulty. I only died twice in this game, and I could finish the entire level packs with ease. Long gone the thinking about the levels and solutions, and it is all about the action with the good old SUPERHOT mechanics now. Where SUPERHOT Mind Control Delete is perfectly in line with its predecessor, is in the graphic style. It's almost identical to the original. So we have the same low poly enemies in red that explode into 1000 shards when hit, as if they were made of crystal, and very similar weapons and architecture. There is certainly more variety and the graphics have taken some more liberties in building the levels, but that's really it. SUPERHOT Mind Control Delete is still good, but for me a bit less than the original title. It begins to show some inevitable limits, such as struggling enormously to get away from itself, or more precisely to expand, or taking a different step into another direction. SUPERHOT is always SUPERHOT, in short, and Mind Control Delete manages to please the progenitor's formula, but adds very little to it. It's still a great game, so it's gonna please everyone who liked the original one.
I'm sitting here drowning in my own ball sweat thanks to summer finally kicking in with all of its glory, so allow me to keep this one short and simple. Gently reminding us that EA lost rights to the Star Wars franchise, Squadrons is our monthly leading title numero uno, but closely following suit is Phoenix Point, spiritual successor to XCOM. Latter had no problem performing as a leading title is expected to, and has secured its place in the monthly top, perhaps to a surprise, accompanied by Pumpkin Jack and Call of the Sea. Following below them we have the trio of Gamedec, SUPERHOT and Siege Survival, and just as well do we find in this tier Star Wars Squadrons, barely making it out of the bottom tier by a Wookiee hair. Last and just as well least, the utterly painful experience of I Am Fish rounds out this month, summing up to a total 18 points out of the maximum 24. The third member of the 75% gang this year, June, once again aims for and delivers in the top mid tier, and it's left to the second half of 2022 to break the 80% barrier. As always, we'd be very grateful if you pleased the machine gods by liking our video. If you'd like to come along for the next one, don't hesitate to subscribe. Any and all recommendations are welcome in the comment section, and we'll see you again next month.